These Raiders weren't just feared, they were the stuff of nightmares. Forget the silver and black mystique you see today. Back then, those colors stood for something darker. Behind the helmets were men who treated football like open combat. Some were celebrated as heroes, others were branded villains. But every one of them carried a dangerous edge that didn't just separate them from the rest of the league. It set an identity for an entire franchise. In this video, we're pulling the curtain all the way back on the Raiders' most dangerous players. Not the obvious highlight reel names you already know, but the ones who shook the game the players' opponents hated lining up against. The ones who delivered hits that ended careers, forced the league office into emergency rule changes, and created reputations so intense they still get whispered about decades later. These aren't polished stories. Some are controversial. Some have been buried under decades of NFL PR cleanup. Others are known only because former teammates finally spoke up. But every story reveals a simple truth. The Raiders didn't just play football. They weaponized it. By the time we're done, you'll understand exactly how this team became the NFL's ultimate outlaws. Loved by a few, hated by many, and feared by everyone who had to face them. Stay locked in until the end, because the deeper we go, the more unfiltered and shocking these stories get. If you're into untold legends, forgotten wild moments, and the darker side of football history, you're in the right place. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and buckle up, because this journey into the Raiders' most dangerous players starts now. They called him the Assassin, and trust me, it wasn't just a nickname. Jack Tatum wasn't simply a safety for the Oakland Raiders. He was an enforcer in its purest form. Every snap felt like a warning. Every collision felt like a threat. Opponents didn't just know where he was, they stayed awake the night before thinking about it. Tatum entered the league in 1971 and wasted zero time building his reputation. He wasn't the biggest guy, a little over 6 feet tall and around 200 pounds. Nothing outlandish physically, but the force behind his hits made him feel like he weighed twice that. Quarterbacks knew that going across the middle against Oakland was basically volunteering to get wrecked. Wide receivers understood that if they extended too far in a route, Tatum would be right there, ready to turn them into a cautionary tale. And the moment that cemented his legacy and his infamy came during a 1978 preseason game. New England Patriots receiver Darryl Stingley ran a crossing route, the kind receivers run thousands of times. Tatum met him with a hit so violent, so sudden, that the stadium went silent. Stingley collapsed instantly and never walked again. The blow left him paralyzed from the chest down. It became one of the most haunting moments in NFL history. And Tatum never apologized. He insisted it was part of the sport. That refusal, that unflinching, unapologetic stance, only deepened the terror around his name. But if you think Tatum's story is defined by a single hit, you're missing the bigger picture. He was the backbone of the Raiders' legendary secondary, known as the Soul Patrol, a group that made life miserable for every offense in the league. Lining up with George Atkinson, Skip Thomas, and Willie Brown, Tatum helped turn the Raiders' defensive backfield into a place where receivers didn't just lose the ball, they lost their nerve. They didn't merely cover routes, they punished them. Their style blurred the line between football and a fistfight, and Tatum was the sharpest blade in that arsenal. He thrived in an era when NFL rules were looser, when the violence was raw and unfiltered, and when defensive backs could leave receivers wondering if the next hit would be their last. His presence alone changed the psychology of the game. Teams weren't just trying to beat the Raiders, they were trying to survive them. Countless receivers admitted they hesitated, going across the middle, pulled up on catches, or straight up lost focus, because they knew Tatum was stalking the field. That mental edge, you couldn't measure it with stats, but it won games. And make no mistake, Tatum wasn't just a wrecking ball. He was a playmaker. He racked up interceptions, made clutch defensive plays, and helped push the Raiders deep into the postseason repeatedly, including their Super Bowl victory in 1977. But that's not why people remember him. They remember the message behind every hit, enter his zone, and you pay the price. Tatum embodied everything the Raiders' outlaw era stood for: ruthless, fearless, relentless. He wasn't defending passes. He was defining an era when violence wasn't just part of the game, it was the game. Ben Davidson never looked like a typical defensive lineman. At 6 feet 8 inches, with a handlebar mustache sharp enough to make him look like an outlaw straight out of a 1970s biker movie, he didn't just play the villain, he leaned into it. And in the NFL, he became exactly that. A towering menace who treated every snap like a chance to rewrite someone's dental history. Davidson's reputation was built on a simple principle. The whistle was optional. Quarterbacks hated seeing him line up across from them because they knew the play wasn't over until he decided it was. Even when the ball was gone, even when the action had clearly stopped, Davidson kept coming. His hits were hard, late, and unapologetic. Intimidation wasn't a side effect of his game. It was the strategy. The moment that truly sealed his legacy came in 1970 against the Kansas City Chiefs. Quarterback Len Dawson had already released the ball and stood relaxed after the play. Davidson barreled in anyway, drilling Dawson into the ground with a hit so late it practically required a calendar. Chaos erupted instantly. Chiefs players charged in, fists flying, bodies piling up as the crowd went wild. It was one of the ugliest brawls of the era, and it didn't just spark a rivalry. It forced the league to step in. The NFL literally wrote a new rule to stop Davidson-style late hits. A personal foul after the whistle would now give the offense an automatic first down. Unofficially, everyone called it the Ben Davidson rule. Most players would hate being blamed for a rule change. Davidson, he wore it like a badge. His outlaw mustache, his grin that almost dared refs to throw a flag. Davidson knew exactly what he represented, and Raiders owner Al Davis absolutely loved it. The Raiders didn't try to hide from a villain image. They embraced it, and Davidson became the perfect poster boy for the league's most rebellious franchise. Off the field, he carried that same larger-than-life presence. He slid effortlessly into Hollywood, landing roles in commercials, movies, and TV shows. Casting directors didn't need an explanation. One look at him, and they knew. Villain, no question. Fans who once hated him on Sundays now watched him play the heavy on screen. His football persona translated perfectly. Because in many ways, it wasn't a character at all. But for Raiders fans, Davidson wasn't dirty. He was family. He didn't fake toughness. He didn't pretend to be polite. He pushed the league, pushed opponents, pushed limits, and never apologized. And that made him a perfect Raider. Now let's shift from villain energy to brute force. Because if Ben Davidson was the outlaw, Marv Hubbard was the battering ram. Hubbard didn't run the football, he detonated it. Fullback was supposed to be a position of power, sure, but Hubbard turned it into hand-to-hand combat. John Madden once said he was one of the toughest players he ever coached. And that wasn't some nostalgic exaggeration. Hubbard treated the field like a war zone. At 6 feet tall and built like a wrecking ball with legs, he didn't evade defenders. He hunted them. Every run looked like a collision waiting to happen, and defenders knew what was coming. Lowered shoulders, exploding contact, and a mindset that said, if you're in the way, that's your problem. The 1970s NFL was already brutal, but Hubbard stood out, even in that era. He wasn't flashy, didn't rely on speed, and didn't bother with finesse. He just punished defenses. By the fourth quarter, safeties and linebackers were tired of tackling him. That's when Hubbard went to work. Broken tackles, bruised chests, and defenders second-guessing their career choices. That was his specialty. The Oakland Coliseum loved him for it. Raiders fans didn't want ballet in the backfield. They wanted violence disguised as football, and Hubbard delivered that every Sunday. Every time he plowed through a defensive line, the crowd erupted. He wasn't just moving the ball. He was sending a message. The Raiders will not back down ever. His production proved it. He cracked over 800 rushing yards in 1971 and crossed the 1,000-yard mark the next season. But stats didn't define him. The way he earned those yards did. He ran like every defender owed him money, and he intended to collect. Opponents admitted it openly. Tackling Hubbard hurt. Not figuratively, physically. Some players said he felt like steel. Others said, by halftime, their shoulders were already screaming. By the end of the game, many defenses were simply broken, and Madden loved it. Hubbard's punishing style softened defenses, forcing them to bring extra bodies into the box. That opened the field for Ken Stabler, Fred Biletnikoff, and Cliff Branch to go deep. Hubbard wasn't just a battering ram. He was the strategic key that made the Raiders' offense work. His balance was underrated too. He'd take hits that would knock most players sideways, but he stayed on his feet, legs churning like pistons. Even with 3 defenders hanging on, Hubbard dragged them forward for extra yards. Coaches called it refusing to go down. RaiderNation called it football, the way it was meant to be played. Off the field, Hubbard was the opposite of his on-field destruction. Quiet, loyal, and zero interest in the spotlight. He fit the Raiders' culture perfectly, a team built not on glamour but on grit, toughness, and rebellion. There's a famous story from practice. Hubbard hit so hard that defensive players begged Madden to slow him down. Madden just laughed. He knew Hubbard only had one speed, full collision. By game day, his helmet looked dented, his jersey shredded, and grass stains covered every inch. He thrived in chaos. While others avoided pain, Hubbard embraced it. When people talk about the toughest Raiders of all time, his name always comes up, not because of flashy highlights, but because he played like a warrior in pads. Every carry was a statement. Every hit was a promise. And every yard was earned through pure force. John Matuszak wasn't just big, he was impossible to miss. At 6 feet 8 inches and well over 280 pounds, he looked like somebody had taken a defensive end and stretched him into myth. When he lined up for the Raiders, he didn't look like a football player. He looked like a warning. Matuszak joined the Raiders in 1976, right as the franchise was assembling one of the most intimidating defenses the league had ever seen. And he fit right in. As a defensive end, he had the size, the power, and the raw aggression to overwhelm offensive linemen before they even got set. With him on the line, Oakland's defense didn't just defend, it bullied teams into submission. He helped carry the Raiders to 2 Super Bowl championships and cemented himself as part of the franchise's golden era. On Sundays, he was a force that thrilled RaiderNation. But ask anyone who knew him, and they'll tell you the same thing. It was his personality, not just his play, that made him unforgettable. Because the twos, as teammates called him, wasn't just intense. He was volatile, electric. The kind of fire that made him dangerous on the field, but unpredictable off it. When the pads came off, Matuszak lived like the rules didn't apply. His life became a blur of late nights, wild parties, heavy drinking, and choices that pushed him to the edge. He fit the Raiders' outlaw identity perfectly, sometimes too perfectly. Drugs, alcohol, and chaos followed him. And teammates told stories that sounded like scenes from a rock star memoir. Nights that turned into mornings, parties that turned into damage control, a lifestyle burning way too hot. Yet every Sunday, he showed up ready to battle at the highest level of professional football. That contradiction defined him. On game day, he was disciplined enough to dominate. But off the field, his world spiraled into noise and excess. Coaches tried to rein him in. Friends tried to guide him. But Matuszak lived life at full throttle, no brakes. He didn't answer to rules. He challenged them. His temper could ignite without warning. And opponents knew he played with an edge that sometimes crossed the line. The same fury that fueled him on the field spilled into his personal life, leading to fights, headlines, and the kind of trouble that made the league nervous. And yet Raiders fans adored him. He was raw, unfiltered, and larger than life, the perfect embodiment of the franchise's rebel soul. He even took that persona beyond football, stepping into Hollywood and becoming a recognizable face on screen. His most famous role came in The Goonies, where he played Sloth, a character equal parts terrifying and lovable. It was the perfect reflection of how fans saw him, a giant with a wild exterior and a strange, rough-edged charm. But fame didn't fix the battles he fought behind the scenes. His lifestyle took a toll, physically, mentally, emotionally. The same fuel that made him magnetic also burned him. From the inside out, teammates remembered a guy who lived loud but carried pain he tried to drown out. Football was both a platform and a mask. On the field, he was a champion off it. He was fighting demons. He never really escaped. When people look back on that Raiders era, Matuszak always comes up. Not just because of the Super Bowls, not just because of the movie roles, but because he represented the pure, rebellious essence of the team. He wasn't polished. He wasn't safe. He was a walking contradiction. Powerful, reckless, and unforgettable. Then there was Jeff Barnes, a name casual fans might overlook, but players and coaches absolutely didn't. Barnes didn't chase glory. He didn't need spotlight moments. He made a name in one of football's most ruthless, unforgiving corners, special teams. Barnes joined the Raiders in 1977 after a standout college career at Cal State Hayward. Most rookies struggle to stand out on a roster packed with stars, but Barnes figured out exactly where the Raiders needed him, and he threw himself into that role with reckless abandon. Special teams is where careers are made by grit, not glamour. A place where collisions are violent, space disappears instantly, and every play feels like a sprint into a car crash. Barnes thrived there. He didn't tap the brakes. Every kickoff, every punt, he came flying downfield full speed, blowing through blockers and unloading hits that could flip field position and momentum in an instant. Opponents knew number 56 was coming, and they braced for impact. Inside the locker room, respect for him was real. Teammates trusted his toughness. Coaches trusted his consistency. Barnes didn't back down from anyone or anything, and that edge made him one of the most dangerous special teams players in Raiders history. Over time, Barnes rotated in as a linebacker, but special teams remained his kingdom. He played in 2 Super Bowls and stayed with the Raiders for his entire 10-year NFL career, from 1977 to 1987 loyalty. Like that is rare. Surviving that long in the violent chaos of special teams is even rarer. Injuries were constant threats. Pain was part of the job, but Barnes endured. He didn't chase headlines. He chased hits. He brought the grit Raiders fans loved, the kind that never shows up on stat sheets, but wins the respect of every teammate who sees you throw yourself into battle again and again. For RaiderNation, Jeff Barnes wasn't just another guy on the roster. He was the spirit of the team, physical, fearless, and willing to do the dirty work nobody else wanted. The Raiders have had stars, legends, icons. But Barnes was something different. He was the guy opponents dreaded, and teammates were grateful to have on their side. When most people think about dangerous Raiders, they picture loud hitters, brutal tacklers, and guys who left a trail of broken bodies behind them. But sometimes danger doesn't roar, it whispers. And no Raider embodied silent danger better than Cliff Branch. Branch didn't need trash talk. He didn't need intimidation. All he needed was a sliver of space. One blink of hesitation from a defender, and he was already gone, a blur of silver and black streaking down the field. His danger wasn't in violence. It was in speed. Terrifying. Game-breaking, defensive coordinator nightmare speed. Opponents said he was the most dangerous player on the field, not because he could hit hard, but because he could erase angles, expose weaknesses, and turn routine plays into devastating touchdowns. Branch was pure acceleration. At the snap, defenders felt panic. One wrong step, and Branch would be deep behind them, waiting for the bomb Al Davis wanted every single drive. His routes were weapons, sharp, clean, surgical. And just when a corner thought they had the angle, Branch shifted gears and left them in the dust. His speed wasn't just fast, it was world-class, literally. In the early 1970s, Branch posted track times that ranked among the best in the country. That track background turned him into the ultimate deep threat. And Al Davis loved deep threats. Davis believed in vertical football, stretch the field, punish defenses, strike fast. Branch was the perfect embodiment of that philosophy. With him on the field, safeties had to back up. Defensive coordinators had to game plan around him. And quarterbacks had a golden ticket to explosive plays. Teammates said Branch barely talked trash. He didn't need to. His play spoke loudly enough. Hall of Fame corners admitted he was the matchup they dreaded most. They knew he could burn them, even when they executed perfectly. And he did, over and over again. Branch became a 3-time Super Bowl champion and earned multiple Pro Bowl nods. But despite his dominance, he spent years overshadowed by bigger personalities. Fred Biletnikoff got the headlines. The Soul Patrol got the fear. The big hitters got the mythology. Branch quietly dismantled defenses, but didn't chase the spotlight. Still, those who watched him up close never forgot. They knew the Raiders' entire offense changed the moment Branch stepped on the field. He stretched defenses vertically, opened the middle for others, and forced opponents to respect every inch of turf. Even decades later, his peers called him the fastest man they'd ever seen in pads. Speed alone isn't enough to be legendary, but Branch wasn't just fast. He was disciplined, precise, and ruthless in execution. He didn't rely on raw ability. He mastered timing, spacing, and leverage. He beat defenders with IQ and then humiliated them with speed. For years, fans pushed for him to be honored in Canton. Finally, in 2022, long after his passing, Cliff Branch was inducted into the Hall of Fame. Overdue, absolutely, but it cemented his legacy as one of the most quietly dangerous weapons in Raiders history. And we reach a name that still splits opinions faster than any in modern Raiders lore: Bill Romanowski. If the old-school Raiders were defined by outlaws, Romanowski arrived as a throwback to that chaos. By the time he joined the Raiders in 2002, he was already infamous across the league: tough, relentless, and to many players, dirty, very dirty. He wasn't a young guy trying to make a name. He was a hardened veteran with more mileage than most linebackers ever accumulate, and his durability was no accident. Romanowski played 243 consecutive games, a streak built on intensity, obsession, and a willingness to do whatever it took to stay on the field. But his reputation wasn't built on endurance. It was built on violence, cheap shots, late hits, trash talk that didn't just get under your skin. It lived there, rent-free. Romanowski crossed lines, then crossed them again. In Denver, long before he put on silver and black, he broke a teammate's eye socket in a practice fight. That story followed him everywhere. So when he arrived in Oakland, he fit right in. The Raiders weren't looking for choir boys. They leaned into conflict. They celebrated edge, and Romanowski brought conflict to every snap he played. With the Raiders, he started every game for 2 seasons. Physicality wasn't just part of his game. It was the philosophy. He played like each down was personal warfare. Opponents hated lining up across from him because they knew he wouldn't stop after the whistle. He pushed boundaries physically and mentally. He tried to dominate you, frustrate you, or provoke you, whatever it took to win the moment. Fans loved him for the same reason opponents despised him. He embodied the brutal, unpolished spirit of early 2000s football, a league caught between old-school violence and modern rules. Romanowski lived on that border. To some, he was a warrior who left everything on the field. To others, he was the face of what the NFL wanted to eliminate. But no matter where you stand, his impact is undeniable. For 2 years in Oakland, he added another chapter to the Raiders' long history of dangerous men, the kind who blurred the line between competitor and combatant. And that brings us to the truth, tying all these players together. Danger wore a lot of faces in silver and black. Some delivered bone-crushing hits. Others forced the NFL to write new rules just to keep them in check. A few didn't terrify opponents with violence at all. They did it with blazing speed or silent precision. And some carried chaos off the field that matched the fury they brought on it. Jack Tatum, Ben Davidson, Marv Hubbard, John Matuszak, Jeff Barnes, Cliff Branch, Bill Romanowski. Different weapons, same effect. Intimidation, control, psychological warfare. These players didn't just compete, they shaped how opponents prepared mentally. Teams didn't merely plan for the Raiders. They feared them. They braced themselves. They understood that stepping onto the field meant stepping into a fight, physical, emotional, and sometimes moral. Al Davis didn't build a team of safe, polished professionals. He built a brotherhood of warriors, men who wanted to win more than they wanted approval, men who didn't mind being villains if it meant victory. Just win, baby, wasn't a slogan. It was a mindset, and these players embodied it. They created the outlaw soul of the franchise, a franchise that never cared about being liked, a franchise that thrived in the shadows, embraced the edge, and dared opponents to challenge them. The Raiders didn't become a team. They became a myth. A symbol of rebellion, grit, and danger. Every hit, every stare down, every broken rule added to the legend. And that legend still echoes, even as the league tries to polish its image. These men weren't clean-cut. They weren't safe. They weren't predictable. They were Raiders. Raiders who carried danger like armor. Raiders who played with fire. Raiders who left opponents burned. They weren't just Raiders on the field. They were legends built on fear.